My wife thought I was just a retired janitor. Then she found my $12 million portfolio. My name is Harold Miller. I'm 72 years old, and for most of my adult life, I worked as a school janitor in a small town outside of Des Moines, Iowa. My job was never glamorous. No one looks twice at the man pushing a mop down the hallway or scrubbing cafeteria floors. But I liked it. It was honest work, and it gave me time to think. I never needed much to be happy. A hot cup of coffee in the morning, clean socks, and the sound of kids laughing in the schoolyard. Those were the things that made me feel alive. I married Linda when I was 30. She was beautiful, ambitious, and full of dreams I never quite understood. While I found joy in simple routines, she always longed for something bigger: vacations in Europe, fine dining, a life of luxury she saw in movies and magazines. I thought I could keep her grounded. She thought she could change me. Neither of us really won that battle, but we stayed together. 40 years of shared breakfasts, quiet birthdays, and polite silence over dinner. From the outside, we looked like a regular old couple, but over time, our differences carved a quiet canyon between us. Linda was never cruel, not exactly, but she never hid her disappointment either. I wasn't the man she'd dreamed of marrying. No suits, no flashy cars, no social circles. Just a janitor with calloused hands and work boots that tracked dust into the house. I noticed how she introduced me as Harold without mentioning what I did. Like being a janitor was something to be embarrassed about. What Linda never knew, what nobody knew, was that I had a mind for numbers. I never went to college, but I spent nights at the library, reading books on investing while she watched her shows. I studied Warren Buffett like he was the Bible. Every extra dollar I had, I didn't spend, I invested. Not in flashy stocks, but in boring, reliable things. Index funds, dividend stocks, cheap real estate. Year after year, I bought and held. I never told Linda. Not because I didn't trust her, but because I knew she wouldn't understand the patience it took. She often complained about our lifestyle. "You could have been more," she'd say while staring out the window. "We could have had more." I'd just nod. No point in arguing. I didn't want to fight. I believed that real wealth wasn't about what you showed, it was about what you secured. I'd grown up poor. My parents had nothing. I knew what it meant to have a broken water heater in January or to eat canned beans for a week, so I planned for a life where I'd never be desperate again, and I did it in silence. When I finally retired, Linda didn't even attend my farewell lunch. "What's there to celebrate?" she said flatly. "You're just a janitor leaving a job no one wanted in the first place." Her words stung, but I didn't flinch. I'd spent a lifetime listening to people underestimate me. The kids at school ignored me. Teachers barely said hello. I had become invisible long before I stopped working. But being invisible has its advantages. No one expects the janitor to be dangerous, or smart, or rich. After I retired, Linda grew colder. She thought I'd finally be useless, sitting around watching TV, growing fat and dull. But I had my routine. I'd wake up early, read the market reports, go for a walk, and stop by the bank. I wasn't idle. I was managing a portfolio that had quietly ballooned to over $12 million. Every move I made was calculated, and all of it, every penny, was in my name only. Linda didn't know because Linda never asked. She assumed I had nothing, and I let her. That assumption would become her biggest mistake. Linda always believed she knew me completely. After all, we had shared a home, a bed, and a life for 4 decades. But the truth was, she had never truly seen me. I was the quiet man who nodded instead of arguing, who fixed leaking faucets and shoveled the driveway without being asked. She mistook that silence for simplicity, my humility for lack of ambition, and slowly, that misunderstanding became the foundation of our marriage. I didn't fight it. I used it. Our conversations had grown dry over the years. She'd talk about neighbors buying new SUVs or planning cruises to Italy. I'd listen, sip my coffee, and give neutral replies. She called me boring. She once joked at a dinner party that I was the most predictable man in Iowa. Everyone laughed. I smiled, but deep down, I was already halfway through purchasing my fourth rental property. While she gossiped with her friends about handbags, I was reinvesting dividends and tracking capital gains. Linda spent freely, nothing outrageous, but carelessly. Designer bags here, a spa membership there, constant online shopping. I never stopped her. She assumed I was dipping into my retirement fund or social security. She never realized that I had separate accounts, completely untouched by our household budget. I had created legal structures years ago, LLCs and trusts, with a financial advisor who understood discretion. I wasn't just planning for retirement. I was building an empire in secret. Our daughter, Allison, was the only one who ever suspected there was more to me. She once caught me watching a market analysis on YouTube and asked, "Dad, since when are you into stocks?" I just smiled and said, "Keeps my brain sharp." She laughed and shrugged it off, but she noticed that I always seemed calm, even when money was tight or when Linda panicked over bills. I think Allison sensed that I knew something everyone else didn't. She just never pushed. Linda's disappointment in me deepened after I retired. "We wasted our best years," she'd mutter under her breath. "Other couples travel, buy vacation homes, enjoy life, and I'm stuck here watching you clip coupons." The irony was cruel. I could have bought her that vacation home in cash. I could have given her the life she craved, 10 times over. But she never earned it, not with her words, not with her loyalty, and certainly not with the coldness she'd grown so comfortable showing me. There was a moment just a few months after retirement when I considered telling her. She was complaining about the neighbor's new Tesla, saying, "If only we'd been smarter with money." I almost laughed. Instead, I opened my mouth and said, "Some things are more valuable than a car." She scoffed and rolled her eyes. That was all the answer I needed. She wasn't ready to see me as anything but a failure, and I wasn't going to offer her a treasure she would never appreciate. Around that time, I began updating my will. I made sure Allison was taken care of, as well as my 2 grandkids. I left specific instructions with my lawyer. If anything ever happened to me, the full scope of my estate would be revealed, and Linda would get what she legally deserved. No more, no less. I didn't want revenge. Not yet. But I was preparing for the day when the mask would fall and she'd finally see the man she'd dismissed for decades. I was no fool. I was patient. But life has a funny way of pushing you before you're ready. The day that everything changed didn't come with a warning. It came with lipstick on a receipt, a late-night phone call, and a voice message she forgot to delete. It started with a receipt, just an ordinary piece of thermal paper left on the kitchen counter while Linda rushed to take a call in the other room. I wasn't snooping. I rarely paid attention to her things, but this time, something caught my eye. A charge from a hotel downtown, one of those boutique places that cost $300 a night, 2 meals, champagne, rose petals. My hands went cold. Linda hadn't mentioned going anywhere that week, and I sure hadn't been invited. My stomach twisted with a familiar dread, the kind I hadn't felt since the day my father died. I tried to tell myself it could have been a mistake. Maybe she met a friend. Maybe it was a surprise for me. But deep down, I already knew. Something had shifted in her weeks ago. She smiled less, stayed out longer, and had grown more distant than ever. She didn't even pretend to care about hiding her contempt anymore. "You wouldn't understand," she'd say when I asked about her mood. Now I was beginning to understand too well. And the truth didn't just sting, it burned. I didn't confront her right away. I've learned over the years that silence is power. So I started paying closer attention. Her texts, her calls, the way she locked her phone screen when I walked into the room. One night while she was asleep on the couch, I saw her phone buzz with a name I didn't recognize. Greg. I didn't open the message, but the preview was enough. "Last night was amazing. I can still smell you on me." My heart sank, but I didn't feel rage. I felt something far colder. Clarity. The next day, She was unusually cheerful. She asked if I wanted to go to the farmer's market with her, something we hadn't done in years. I agreed. We walked side by side like strangers pretending to be a couple. She pointed at fresh strawberries and smiled. "Let's make a pie later," she said. I nodded. Meanwhile, I was planning something else entirely. It wasn't just about catching her. It was about setting the stage for the moment she'd realize everything she thought about me was wrong. I started keeping a journal. Not of my emotions, but of facts, receipts, dates, times, messages. I created a folder on my computer labeled tax docs, but it was really a digital archive of her betrayal. I wasn't collecting evidence for a courtroom. I was preparing for the unveiling. When I finally showed her who I was, I wanted it to be undeniable. No excuses, no room for manipulation. Just the raw, brutal truth she'd been too blind to see for 40 years. One night, while she was taking a shower, I listened to her saved voicemails through the home phone speaker. She hadn't bothered deleting them. One was from Greg, drunk and rambling. "You're wasting time with that old janitor. I could give you everything. You deserve better." I didn't flinch. I'd heard worse from strangers in my youth. What he didn't know was that the old janitor he mocked had just bought a building downtown, paid in full, in cash. I started dressing better. Not flashy, just sharper. Polished shoes, pressed shirts, Linda noticed. "Trying to impress someone?" she teased. "No," I said plainly. "Just decided to show up differently." She laughed, but uneasily. I think a small part of her felt the shift. She didn't know what was coming, but she sensed something had changed, and that was exactly what I wanted. A sliver of doubt before the storm. Because soon, I'd no longer be the quiet man she dismissed. I'd be the storm she never saw coming. I stopped doing the things that used to keep the peace. Folding her laundry, fixing her car mirror, checking the boiler when it made noise. At first, she barely noticed. But as the days passed, she began asking questions. "Did you forget to pick up the dry cleaning? Why is the Wi-Fi acting up again?" I just smiled. I must be slipping in my old age. That excuse worked for years, until she realized it wasn't forgetfulness. It was indifference. I was letting her life crack piece by piece, the same way she let our marriage corrode without a second glance. I started spending more time at the library and the park. I'd sit with a thermos of black coffee, watching life move around me, quietly preparing for my next chapter. Linda assumed I was wasting time, just another old man feeding ducks. She had no idea I was meeting with a young financial advisor who would help me quietly move my investments to a more aggressive growth strategy. I was diversifying: real estate, tech startups, energy funds. I wasn't planning to take revenge with anger. I was planning it with silence and spreadsheets. She still believed I was just scraping by on a janitor's pension. I let her. She thought the two-bedroom bungalow we lived in was all I had. I let her. She laughed when I said I wasn't worried about the economy. "You've never even opened a stock account," she said once. I nodded along. She had no clue I'd been investing since the late 80s. Mutual funds, dividend stocks, real estate syndicates, and I never touched a dollar of it. I lived modestly and let my wealth grow like a tree in the woods, unnoticed but firmly rooted. I knew the moment of revelation had to be perfect, not petty, not loud, just undeniable. I began slowly shifting money around, bought a new condo in my name only, put a luxury vehicle in a locked garage across town. I hired a lawyer, not for divorce yet, but to prepare for every possible outcome. Linda would soon realize the man she betrayed was not the man she thought she'd married. And when she begged to stay, I wanted every legal document ready to say, "Too late." She continued seeing Greg. I didn't confront her. What would be the point? I wasn't interested in winning her back or shaming her. I was building a version of my life where she simply didn't exist. A cleaner version. A future where her betrayal was a footnote, not the headline. She had spent decades dismissing me, mocking my silence, my simple clothes, my quiet routines. But she had no idea that I had learned long ago. Those who talk the loudest are often the poorest. The real power is in the patience. Then came the dinner party. A couple from her Pilates class invited us. I almost declined, but then I saw an opportunity. We arrived, and Linda couldn't stop bragging about her retired janitor husband who tinkered with crossword puzzles all day. One of the guests, a real estate broker, made a smug joke about how we must live paycheck to paycheck. I smiled politely and asked him, "How's your multi-family portfolio doing this quarter? Still upside down on your 3-unit in Highland Park?" His face dropped. Linda froze. I just sipped my wine. The silence that followed was delicious. On the drive home, Linda asked, "How did you know that about him?" I looked at her and said, "You'd be surprised what janitors over here, especially the ones who own half the block." She laughed nervously, unsure if I was joking, but something in her eyes shifted. For the first time in years, she looked at me, not like I was beneath her, but like she wasn't sure who she had been living with. And she was right. She didn't know me anymore. She only knew the version she thought she could control. After that dinner party, Linda grew quieter. Not in a peaceful way, in a suspicious way. She began hovering more, asking questions she never cared about before. "Where are you going this early? What's this envelope from Sterling Partners?" I brushed it all off with casual indifference, but I knew the seed had been planted. She was finally realizing that I wasn't the harmless retiree she had molded into the background of her life. That made her nervous, and that made me smile. She started snooping. I caught her one night in my desk drawer, pretending to look for batteries. Another day, she accidentally opened a sealed letter from my investment advisor. I didn't confront her. I wanted her to feel the tension, to wonder how much she didn't know, how much I had hidden. This was the beginning of her unraveling, and I wasn't going to interrupt it. Let her stew. Let her wonder why her husband, the one she betrayed, suddenly seemed 10 steps ahead. One morning I made coffee and left my laptop open on purpose. On the screen was a spreadsheet with 6 figures, not labeled, just there. She stared at it, frozen. "What's this?" she asked. I looked at her like she was a stranger. "Just a retirement hobby. You know how I like numbers." I closed the screen gently, sipped my coffee and walked out. She didn't follow me. She didn't speak for the rest of the day. That silence, that was the sound of regret beginning to bloom. I started dressing differently. Not flashy, just sharp. Pressed shirts, polished boots, a sleek leather watch. The kind of details that someone like Linda would notice and obsess over. I didn't buy a sports car or throw money around. That wasn't my style. I simply became the kind of man whose presence couldn't be ignored anymore, and it drove her crazy. She wanted to ask questions, but doing so would mean admitting she never really knew me. Her pride wouldn't allow that. Meanwhile, Greg's name stopped coming up. I knew she was still seeing him, but something had shifted. The way she looked at him, or rather didn't talk about him, told me she was beginning to compare. And that's when I realized she hadn't just betrayed me. She had traded me in for someone cheaper, smaller, and weaker. And now that the illusion was breaking, she was trying to climb back into my world. A world she had laughed at. A world I had built, alone. Then came the evening she cooked dinner. That hadn't happened in years. She wore that red dress she used to put on when we were younger, back when she actually saw me. "I thought it'd be nice," she said softly, "to eat together. Just us." I nodded, sat, and let her serve the meal. She poured the wine, lit candles, even played that old jazz record we used to love. But it was too late. I watched her perform affection like a desperate actress trying to win back the lead role. The theater was decent, but the show had already closed. Halfway through the meal, she tried to talk. "I've been thinking about our life," she began, "about how much we've built. I never really thanked you for everything you've done. You've always been so steady, so reliable." I smiled and said, "You know, Linda, sometimes people only value foundations when the roof starts leaking." Her face twitched, but she forced a chuckle. She knew. She knew I was no longer hers. And for the first time, she was scared of losing something she never respected. And that was just the beginning. I hadn't even shown her what I was really worth, but she was about to find out. The next morning, I left an envelope on the kitchen table. Nothing dramatic, no red wax seal or fancy lettering, just a plain white envelope with her name written in clean cursive, Linda. Inside, I placed a printout of a single monthly statement from one of my smaller investment accounts, one of several, showing a balance just shy of $1.3 million. I left for my morning walk without a word. No explanation, no message. I didn't need to say anything. That number would speak loud enough. When I returned an hour later, the house was dead silent. I found her sitting at the kitchen counter, still in her robe, staring at the open envelope like it had slapped her. She didn't look up when I entered. "What is this?" she finally asked, her voice brittle. I poured myself a glass of water and sat across from her. "Just a little savings," I said calmly. "For emergencies." Her eyes widened. She tried to laugh, but it came out strained and hollow. "You've been hiding this?" "No," I said. "You just never asked." She didn't speak after that. Her mind was racing, connecting dots, chasing shadows. I could almost hear the wheels turning. How many other accounts? How long had he been saving? What else don't I know? She thought she had married a janitor who mopped school hallways for 40 years. And she had. But she never bothered to see the man behind the mop. The man who read financial books after hours, who listened to market podcasts while scrubbing cafeteria floors, who lived simply so he could one day live free. That day, she didn't go out. No gym, no spa, no lunch dates with her girlfriends. She stayed home, wandering the house like a ghost, lost in a place she thought she knew. I could feel her reevaluating everything. The dinners I declined, the clothes I wore out, the quiet nights I spent reading. Every memory now reframed through a new lens. What if he was never who I thought he was? And she was right. I wasn't. I was more. The next evening, she dressed up again, this time even more carefully. Hair done. Perfume I hadn't smelled in years. She sat beside me on the couch like we were teenagers again. "I was thinking," she began, "maybe we should take a trip. Just the two of us. Maybe Tuscany or the Greek islands." Her eyes searched mine, desperate for warmth, for inclusion, for forgiveness. But I only nodded and said, "Sounds nice." I didn't commit. That's what bothered her the most. She wasn't used to being unsure. For decades, I had been the predictable one. The man who always said yes, who never pushed back, who filled in the gaps of her selfishness with quiet loyalty. But that man was gone now. In his place stood someone unfamiliar, stronger, sharper, untethered, and she didn't know how to handle him. That night, after she went to bed, I opened my laptop and made a few small changes to my accounts. Nothing major, just enough to move things further out of her reach. Just enough to remind myself that I was in control now. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who once thought I had nothing was now clinging to me like I was her last lifeboat. But I wasn't her rescue plan anymore. I was her consequence. A few days later, Linda suggested we have dinner at one of the most expensive restaurants in town. The kind we used to drive past while she'd sigh and say, "Maybe someday." I agreed without hesitation this time, which seemed to throw her off. She had expected resistance, maybe another excuse about money, but instead I simply said, "Sure, make a reservation." That one word, "sure," carried more weight than anything I could have yelled. She didn't know how to process a husband who no longer feared the bill. That night, she wore a dress I hadn't seen in years, emerald green, hugging her figure, her hair carefully styled like she was auditioning for the version of herself I hadn't asked to see in a long time. At the restaurant, she held my hand like she used to in the early days. She laughed at my jokes, complimented my shirt, even called me handsome. All things she hadn't said in months, maybe years. It was an act, but a convincing one. I played along, sipping my wine, letting her bask in the illusion that maybe she still had a chance to rewrite the last chapter. She brought up old memories. Our honeymoon in Maine, the way I used to bring her roses home every Friday, the night our daughter was born. She even wiped away a tear when she recalled how hard I worked to afford her college tuition. "You've always been such a good man," she said softly. I should have appreciated that more. I nodded. You should have. There was no venom in my voice, just truth, honest, heavy truth, and she felt the weight of it. Her hand trembled slightly when she reached for her glass. After dinner, she suggested we take a walk, just like we used to when we were young and broke, but still hopeful. We walked through the quiet streets near the waterfront. The night was crisp, and the moonlight danced on the water. I want to make things right, she whispered. I was selfish. I see that now. I didn't respond right away. I let the silence stretch, watched the ripples in the bay, then said, You didn't break me, Linda. You just reminded me who I really am. That night, she tried to be close to me again. She lingered in the doorway to our bedroom, watching me undress, waiting for a sign. I gave her none. I kissed her cheek, wished her good night, and went to bed, alone, in the guest room. Her face dropped like I'd slammed a door in her heart, and in a way I had, not out of spite, not to punish her, but because I was no longer a man begging for scraps of affection from someone who had taken me for granted for years. In the days that followed, she turned sweeter than sugar. Home-cooked meals, affectionate texts, random compliments, fresh-baked cookies. It was almost comical. Like watching a high schooler cram for a final, she knew she was failing. But none of it moved me. I had seen behind the curtain, and I knew the truth. Her regret wasn't about love. It was about loss. Not of me, but of what I had that she didn't know existed. Her curiosity grew into subtle desperation. She asked small questions. How many accounts do you have? Did you invest in crypto? Have you ever thought of moving somewhere nicer? Each one like a fishing line, cast into a lake she never bothered to explore when she thought it was empty. But I never gave her the satisfaction of answers. Just smiles, shrugs, little things I picked up over the years, I'd say. And that drove her mad. The woman who once lectured me about how we needed to live a little was now realizing she had thrown away the life she wanted, all because she assumed the man in front of her was too simple to have dreams, too quiet to hold power, too kind to carry teeth. But I had all three. I had just chosen to keep them hidden, until now. A week after the dinner, I invited my daughter, Julia, over for coffee. She was always a sharp one, intelligent, ambitious, and fiercely loyal to her old man. Linda tried to play the doting wife that morning, smiling sweetly and offering pastries, but Julia saw right through her. She had noticed the sudden shift. What's going on with Mom? She asked when we were alone in the garage. I smiled. She found something she wasn't supposed to. Julia raised an eyebrow, curious. I handed her a manila folder and said, I want you to read this. Inside were copies of my investment accounts, bank statements, real estate holdings, everything I had kept hidden for over 30 years. Julia's jaw dropped. Dad, this is millions, I nodded. 12, to be exact, give or take. She sat down on the old workbench, stunned. How? You never acted like we had more than a few thousand saved. I chuckled. That's the point. While she was dreaming of mansions and yachts, I was building something real, in silence. Her eyes filled with tears, but it wasn't sadness. It was pride. I explained how I'd started investing in the late 1980s, small amounts at first, in dividend-paying stocks, some real estate, and later in tech when the internet boom began. I read everything I could, watched markets during my lunch breaks, and reinvested every dime. When I retired, everyone assumed I'd live off Social Security and a small pension. Nobody knew I had been quietly turning janitor wages into generational wealth. Why didn't you ever tell Mom? Julia asked. I leaned in, because she never asked the right questions. I told Julia that I had already set up a trust in her name and in the name of her kids. They'd never have to struggle the way I did. Her eyes widened. You really planned this all out? I nodded. I planned everything, except her betrayal. That part caught me off guard. Julia hugged me tightly, whispering, she doesn't deserve a cent of this. I didn't disagree. I'd already spoken with a lawyer. A quiet separation was in motion, one she still didn't see coming. Later that evening, I caught Linda snooping again. This time, It wasn't the garage. It was my email. She had no idea I'd set up a hidden camera after her first stunt. I confronted her calmly. "Looking for something?" She froze, hands still on the mouse. I was just what?" I asked, my voice steady. Trying to find out how much of my money you can still get your hands on?" Her eyes went wide, her face pale. "Your money?" she asked, playing dumb. I didn't need to raise my voice. The footage spoke for itself. I showed her the video. Her expression cracked. Guilt, embarrassment, fear, all there. I told her I knew about her affair long before she thought I did, that I had simply waited, documenting everything, letting her think I was still the foolish janitor who didn't know any better. "You thought you were playing me," I said, "but the truth is, you were never even in the game." For the first time in decades, she had nothing to say, just silence. Heavy, damning silence. That night, I slept better than I had in years. The pieces were finally moving into place. I wasn't seeking revenge, I was seeking closure. And I knew that soon, Linda would realize just how badly she had underestimated the man who cleaned floors for a living, and quietly built an empire while she looked the other way. A few days later, Linda finally confronted me. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting matches or slamming doors. Instead, she sat at the kitchen table, hands trembling, eyes full of desperation. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, voice breaking. "Why keep all this a secret?" I looked at her quietly, weighing my words carefully. "Because I wanted to protect us. From lies, from greed, from the person you became." Her lip quivered. "I never wanted this to happen." "Neither did I said softly. "But it did." She admitted the affair with Greg, how it started with loneliness, then boredom, then a mistake she couldn't take back. I didn't interrupt. Instead, I let her speak, watching her unravel piece by piece. It was hard to see someone you loved fall apart, but I also felt a strange calm. I had expected anger, but instead felt relief that the truth was finally out. "I didn't know how to tell you," she said, tears streaming. "I was scared," I nodded. "I'm glad you told me now." Linda begged for forgiveness, promising she'd change, that she still loved me. But the damage was done. I told her forgiveness wasn't a gift, but a process, and trust had to be earned, not demanded. She lowered her gaze. "What will happen now?" she whispered. I told her I was consulting with a lawyer. "We'll figure out what's fair, but I won't be your bank anymore." Her face drained of color. For the first time, she understood this wasn't a game she could win by tears or apologies. Over the next few weeks, the house was heavy with unspoken tension. Linda tried to rekindle some warmth, but I kept my distance. I was no longer the man she had shaped into her possession. I was a man with secrets, with power, with control. She could either accept it or walk away. The choice was hers, but she had lost the privilege to decide on my terms. I was rewriting the rules now. Meanwhile, I reached out to Allison and Julia, wanting to keep family bonds strong. They were shocked but proud of what I'd accomplished. Their support gave me strength. Linda's betrayal had hurt, but my daughters reminded me of what really mattered: family, loyalty, and integrity. And those were the things I would protect with everything I had. One afternoon, Linda left a note on the kitchen counter. "I'm sorry," it said, simple and unadorned. I read it twice, then tucked it into my wallet. I wasn't ready to forgive, but I was ready to move on. I had spent too long living in silence, too long hiding my worth. Now it was time to live for myself and my family. The life I had quietly built was mine to protect. That night I sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker. I felt a strange peace. The storm was passing. A new dawn was breaking. Linda had underestimated me for years, but I was finally free. Free to rebuild, to reclaim, to redefine my life on my own terms. And nothing felt better than that. The first morning after Linda left, the house felt oddly quiet, almost peaceful. I wandered through the rooms that once held shared memories, now echoing with absence. It was strange to think this house, which had been my refuge and prison for decades, would soon become just a memory. But I wasn't sad. I was relieved. The burden of pretending was gone. For the first time, I could be the man I had always been, without the weight of lies. I spent that day sorting through old boxes in the attic. Photos, letters, souvenirs from happier times. I kept some, but discarded others. It was a symbolic cleansing. I wasn't erasing the past. I was acknowledging it, learning from it, and choosing what to carry forward. As I folded an old shirt Linda had worn on our first anniversary, I realized how far we had drifted and how much I had hidden, not just from her, but from myself. With newfound clarity, I began making plans. The condo downtown was ready, a fresh start away from the ghosts of our marriage. I envisioned mornings sipping coffee on the balcony, afternoons walking the riverfront, evenings filled with laughter and music. This wasn't just a move, it was a declaration that my life was mine to live now. No more compromises, no more hiding, just freedom and possibility. I reconnected with old friends I had drifted away from. Some were surprised to see me so energized, others relieved to have the real me back. I joined a local book club and even signed up for a painting class, things I had never dared to try before. I wanted to explore every facet of myself I had neglected while playing the quiet husband and janitor. Life was opening up, and I was ready to step through the door. Meanwhile, I stayed close with Allison and Julia. Their support was a balm, reminding me of what truly mattered: family. We planned weekend barbecues and shared stories of our childhoods and futures. My grandkids brought laughter and light into the house, chasing away the shadows that lingered. It was a new chapter written not with anger or bitterness, but with hope and love. I also made sure my finances were in order. The portfolio had grown beyond $12 million, and with my lawyer's help, I structured everything to protect my assets and ensure a comfortable retirement. I felt a strange satisfaction knowing that the man Linda had dismissed was not only financially secure, but thriving. It was quiet triumph, not flashy or loud, but deeply fulfilling. Then, out of the blue, Linda called. Her voice was shaky, unsure. She asked to meet, to talk. I agreed, but on my terms. This wasn't about reconciliation, it was about closure. When we met, she seemed smaller somehow, less confident, more fragile. I listened as she apologized again, more sincerely this time. I told her I forgave her, but that forgiveness didn't mean we could go back. Some doors, once closed, don't open again. Walking away from that meeting, I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of betrayal, disappointment, and years of quiet endurance was finally lifting. I was no longer a man defined by others' perceptions. I was a man who had taken control of his destiny, who had found strength in silence, and who was ready to embrace whatever came next. This was not the end, but a powerful new beginning. With Linda out of the picture, I finally had the space to think about what I wanted. For so long, I'd lived for others, my wife, my daughters, my job. Now it was time to live for myself. I took up jogging in the mornings, something I had never done before. The fresh air filled my lungs, and each step felt like shedding the weight of years spent in silence and sacrifice. My body may have been old, but my spirit was finally waking up. I decided to invest not just in stocks and real estate, but in my community. I started volunteering at the local senior center, teaching basic financial literacy to others like me, people who had worked hard but never had the chance to learn about money management. Seeing their eyes light up when they realized they could take control of their finances reminded me why I had worked so hard all these years. It was about dignity, independence, and hope. My daughters encouraged me to travel. They booked a surprise trip to New England in the fall. The colors of the leaves, the crisp air, the small towns filled with history. I hadn't left the state in years, but the journey opened a new chapter of curiosity and adventure. I realized that life was not just about surviving, but about experiencing and savoring every moment. With each new city, I felt more alive, more connected to the world. I also reconnected with old friends from my janitor days, some of whom had retired long ago. We shared stories and laughs over dinners and beers. They had watched me quietly build my fortune without saying a word, and they were proud. "You were always smarter than you let on," one of them said. That acknowledgement warmed me more than any dollar amount ever could. It was proof that true respect comes from integrity, not appearance. At home, I turned the condo into a sanctuary, a place of peace, comfort, and personal style. I filled it with books, art, and music that spoke to my soul. The walls no longer echoed with the silence of neglect, but buzzed with the promise of new beginnings. Every morning, I woke up with gratitude, knowing I had built something worth living for, something no one could take away. Linda's attempts to reconnect became fewer and more desperate. I listened politely, but my heart was closed. Forgiveness was a process, but trust was a fortress with very high walls. She had broken that. I focused instead on healing and growth. The past was a lesson, not a life sentence, and I was determined to make every day count. With my newfound confidence, I even started dating again, slowly, cautiously. Meeting new people reminded me that life could be full of surprises and second chances. It wasn't about replacing the past, but about embracing the future. Each connection was a step toward reclaiming joy, companionship, and love on my own terms. Through it all, I learned that true wealth isn't just money, it's freedom. It's respect. It's the ability to stand tall after falling. And most of all, it's the courage to rewrite your story when you think all hope is lost. As the months passed, I found myself reflecting on the years I had spent living in the shadows of a marriage built on assumptions and silence. It was painful, but necessary. I realized I had given so much of myself away, not out of weakness, but because I believed in love and loyalty. Now that same heart was learning to guard itself. I understood that sometimes the greatest strength lies in walking away, not in staying and hoping for change. Linda's occasional calls became less frequent, her messages more tentative. I never ignored her out of spite. I simply wanted to be sure that any step forward was on my terms, not hers. Trust, once shattered, doesn't come back with empty promises. She had lost the man she thought she knew, and I had found a new version of myself, one who would never again be underestimated or taken for granted. I spent time with Allison and Julia more often now. Our conversations were honest and open, free from the tension that had marked so many years. They wanted to see me happy, and I was determined to show them that life after betrayal could still be rich and meaningful. I shared stories about the travels, the new hobbies, and even the small victories like cooking a perfect meal or finishing a painting. They celebrated every step with me. One afternoon, while sorting through some old letters, I found a note Linda had written years ago, a simple thank you for all the little things I did, the sacrifices I made. It reminded me of a time when things were simpler and love was still a promise, not a broken word. I folded it carefully and placed it in a box marked memories. Some things were worth keeping, if only to remember who I used to be and how far I had come. My financial portfolio continued to grow steadily. I met with my advisor quarterly, tweaking investments and planning for the future. I felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that my efforts were not just for me, but for my daughters and grandchildren too. I wanted them to have a legacy of security and strength, something I had fought for silently for decades. Money wasn't everything, but it was a tool I had learned to wield wisely. Through volunteering, traveling, and reconnecting, I found a new sense of purpose. I was no longer defined by my past role or by what others thought of me. I was an independent man, capable of shaping his destiny. Every day brought new lessons, new joys, and even new challenges. And I faced them with the confidence of someone who had survived the storm and emerged stronger. Linda's story became a distant chapter, a cautionary tale of assumptions and missed chances. I forgave her, not to forget, but to free myself. Forgiveness was my gift to me, a way to close the door gently and walk away without bitterness. I knew I deserved more than what she had given, and now I was ready to receive it. As the sun set on this chapter of my life, I looked forward to what was next. The future was uncertain, yes, but it was mine. No longer shadowed by betrayal or doubt, I stood ready to live boldly, freely, and with the quiet pride of a man who had finally found his true worth. After embracing my independence, I began seeking new connections beyond family and old friends. Loneliness had shadowed me for too long, and I realized that building a new life meant opening my heart again. I joined a local community center where people my age gathered to share hobbies and stories. It was refreshing to be around others who understood the challenges of aging, betrayal, and starting over. We weren't just survivors, we were warriors of our own stories. Among the group was Margaret, a widow with a quick wit and a warm smile that reminded me of better days. Our conversations began with light-hearted banter, gardening tips, favorite books, memories of youth, but gradually grew into something deeper. She didn't judge my past or pity my pain. She simply listened and shared her own experiences. It felt like a breath of fresh air, a reminder that companionship didn't have to come with strings or expectations. Margaret encouraged me to try things I hadn't considered in years. We attended local concerts, took short hikes, and even signed up for cooking classes together. It was awkward at first, stumbling through recipes and laughter, but I found joy in the simplicity of it all. These moments reminded me that life was not just about survival, but about finding happiness in unexpected places. And sometimes that happiness came in the form of a gentle hand and a knowing smile. At home, the condo began to feel more alive with Margaret's presence. We shared dinners and stories, celebrated small victories, and supported each other through the difficult days. It was not a whirlwind romance, but a slow, steady friendship that grew into trust. I found peace in her company, and she found comfort in mine. We were two souls learning to trust again, with no illusions, just honesty. I also made efforts to reconnect with my daughters on a deeper level. We planned a family reunion during the holidays, a chance to heal old wounds and create new memories. Julia brought her children. Allison flew in from across the country, and for the first time in years, the house was filled with laughter and warmth. Seeing my family together reminded me that despite the past, we were still strong, still connected. Linda remained a distant figure, no longer part of my daily thoughts. She had faded into a memory, a lesson learned. I wished her well, but kept my boundaries firm. It was important to protect my peace and not fall back into old patterns of hurt and disappointment. The life I was building now was grounded in respect, self-respect, and mutual respect. Margaret and I continued to explore our new chapter, cautious but hopeful. We understood that life was unpredictable, but that didn't mean we couldn't find joy in the present. With her by my side, I felt less alone. It was a reminder that even after betrayal and loss, there was still room for love, quiet, steady, and real. As the days turned into months, I realized that this new circle of friends, family, and companionship was the true treasure I had been seeking all along. Money could buy comfort, but it couldn't replace the warmth of genuine connection. And in that realization, I found a happiness that no fortune could ever match. Life had changed dramatically, but I was learning to stand tall again. Each morning, I looked in the mirror and saw a man transformed, not just by wealth, but by resilience. The years of hardship, betrayal, and quiet endurance had forged a strength I never knew I possessed. No longer was I the man who swept floors and kept silent. I was a man who owned his story and refused to be defined by others' judgments. I continued to grow my investments carefully, but my focus shifted from accumulation to purpose. I set up a foundation to support local education and vocational training, wanting to give back to the community that had given me a second chance. Watching young people gain skills and hope reminded me why I had worked so hard all my life. Success was sweeter when it could be shared and used to uplift others. At home, the condo became a sanctuary of peace and creativity. I filled the rooms with paintings from Margaret and photos of family moments, the laughter, the hugs, the holidays. The space was a reflection of the new me, vibrant, hopeful, and open. I spent evenings reading by the fireplace, sipping tea, and planning small adventures that brought joy without grand expectations. Margaret and I grew closer with every passing day. Our friendship blossomed into a quiet love, one built on trust, respect, and understanding. She knew my past, but didn't let it define our future. Together, we dreamed of travels and quiet mornings, of days filled with laughter and nights of peaceful rest. She was a reminder that happiness could come softly, like a gentle breeze on a warm day. Family remained my anchor. Alison and Julia were my greatest pride, and their children, my grandchildren, were the light of my life. We shared stories, celebrated birthdays, and created new traditions that healed old wounds. It was clear that while one chapter had closed, another was just beginning, filled with promise and love that transcended pain. Despite the peace I found, I never forgot the lessons learned from Linda's betrayal. It had been a painful wake-up call, but one that ultimately set me free. I understood now that true strength came not from wealth or status, but from knowing your worth and standing firm in the face of adversity. That was the legacy I wanted to leave behind. One afternoon, a reporter from a local paper reached out, intrigued by my story. Reluctantly, I agreed to share my journey, not for fame, but to inspire others who felt trapped by circumstance or undervalued by those around them. The article highlighted not just the fortune I built, but the courage it took to reclaim my life. The response was overwhelming, with messages from people across the country sharing their own stories of resilience. That night, as I sat alone on the balcony, the city lights twinkling below, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment. I had survived betrayal, rebuilt my life, and found love again. I was no longer a forgotten janitor, but a man who had taken control of his destiny. And in that, I found a peace that money alone could never buy. Life seemed to be settling into a comfortable rhythm. I was content in my new home, with Margaret by my side and my family close. But just when I thought I had left the worst behind, an unexpected call shattered my peace. It was from a law firm representing Linda, claiming she wanted to renegotiate the divorce settlement. She had hired a high-powered attorney, apparently willing to fight for a larger share of the assets I had so carefully built. It was a reminder that the past has a way of sneaking back when you least expect it. I wasn't shocked, just annoyed. I'd spent months carefully protecting my interests, and now she was trying to rewrite the rules. But this time, I was prepared. My lawyer assured me that everything was in order and that I had the upper hand. Still, the idea of dragging my family through a messy legal battle was exhausting. I wanted closure, not conflict. But Linda's decision forced me to face one last challenge before I could truly move on. The court dates were tense. Linda's attorney pushed hard, trying to uncover anything that might sway the judge. But I stayed calm, focused on the truth. I presented evidence of her infidelity and her attempts to access the portfolio without permission. The judge listened carefully, impressed by the thoroughness of my case. It was clear that Linda's actions had consequences, and the law was on my side. Despite the strain, I found unexpected support in my community. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers reached out with words of encouragement. Some shared their own stories of betrayal and redemption. Their kindness reminded me that no one has to face hardship alone. It was a powerful reminder of the strength found in connection and solidarity. Meanwhile, Margaret remained my rock. She attended court hearings with me, offering quiet strength and unwavering support. Her presence was a constant reminder that I was no longer the man who had faced betrayal alone. Together, we faced the storm and refused to be broken. Her belief in me fueled my determination to see the battle through to the end. Finally, the judge ruled in my favor. Linda would receive a fair but limited settlement, nothing close to what she had hoped for. The verdict was a relief, a final chapter closing on the painful saga. I felt a surge of gratitude for the justice served, but also a deeper understanding of resilience, how life's toughest battles often bring the greatest growth. With the legal fight behind me, I embraced the freedom I had longed for. I doubled down on my passions, exploring new hobbies and deepening relationships. The weight of the past was lifting, replaced by a bright horizon filled with possibility. I was no longer defined by what had happened, but by who I had become. Looking back, I realized that every twist and turn in this journey had shaped me. Betrayal, forgiveness, love, and loss, all woven together to create a story of redemption. I had gone from a quiet janitor to a man who owned his future, proving that even the most unexpected lives can hold extraordinary truths. With the divorce finalized and the past firmly behind me, I finally felt the freedom I had dreamed of for so long. No more secrets, no more betrayals, no more pretending. I was the architect of my own life now, a life built on truth, resilience, and quiet strength. I woke up each morning with a sense of purpose, eager to fill the days with meaning rather than regret. Margaret and I continued to build our relationship, taking it slow and steady. We traveled to places neither of us had seen before, from the rocky shores of Maine to the vibrant streets of New Orleans. Each trip was an adventure, a chance to discover new parts of ourselves and the world around us. It was a reminder that life, no matter how late, still held endless possibilities. I reconnected deeply with my daughters, watching them grow into remarkable women who had weathered storms of their own. Their children, the grandkids, brought boundless joy and energy into my life. Family gatherings were filled with laughter, stories, and an unspoken understanding that we had all come through something difficult but emerged stronger. Those moments were priceless. Financially, I continued to manage the portfolio with care, but money was no longer the focus. It was a tool to support the life I loved, to help my family, and to give back. I established scholarships and charitable donations, ensuring my wealth would create opportunities for others. It was my way of turning pain into purpose, legacy into light. One evening, sitting on the balcony and watching the sunset paint the sky, I felt a deep sense of peace. The man I had once been, the quiet janitor, the betrayed husband, felt like a distant memory. I was now a man who had reclaimed his dignity and his dreams. The journey had been long and hard, but the destination was worth every step. I often thought about Linda, not with anger or bitterness, but with a sense of closure. Our story was a chapter that taught me invaluable lessons about trust, self-worth, and courage. Forgiving her freed me, but forgetting was never the goal. Instead, I chose to honor my past by living fully in the present. As I looked ahead, I knew there would be challenges, but I also knew I was ready. I had built an unshakable foundation of love, family, and inner strength. No matter what came next, I would face it with grace and confidence. The future was mine to write, and I was determined to make it a story worth telling. This was not just a tale of betrayal and fortune, it was a testament to the human spirit, the power to rise, rebuild, and redefine oneself. I was living proof that sometimes the quietest lives hide the deepest strength, and in that truth I found my freedom,